moment Jake finished speaking, the Great Hall exploded into chaos. Aliens from dozens of different species began talking, shouting, hissing, and making whatever sounds they used to express strong emotions. The translation machines worked overtime, creating a cacophony of overlapping voices in hundreds of different languages. Some aliens stood up from their seats, waving tentacles or claws or other appendages in the air. Others flashed bright colors or changed the patterns on their skin to show their feelings. The Zephyrian High Counselor struck her crystal staff against the floor of her platform, creating a ringing sound that echoed through the entire hall. "Order!" she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. "This assembly will maintain proper decorum." But Jake was not finished. The chaos in the hall only made him more determined to say what he had come here to say. He raised his voice above the din, and somehow his words cut through all the alien noise. "You want to know what really makes humanity different?" Jake shouted, his voice carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. "We refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable just because some law says it should be allowed to happen. We refuse to believe that being careful is more important than being kind. And yes, we absolutely refuse to follow laws that let innocent people die, just because helping them would be inconvenient or messy." The noise in the hall began to die down, as aliens realized that the human was still speaking. They had not expected such defiance from a species that was supposed to be on trial for its crimes. Jake continued, his voice now carrying clearly through the translation system. "Every single time we have broken your laws, it was because those laws were standing in the way of doing what was right. Every time we have ignored your rules, it was because following those rules would have meant letting good people suffer or die. Every time we have chosen to act instead of asking permission first, it was because we knew that by the time permission came, if it ever came at all, it would be too late to help anyone." A new voice spoke from the shadows of the upper galleries. A section of the hall that most of the assembly had probably forgotten was even there. The voice was old, older than anything Jake had ever heard, and it carried the weight of countless centuries. "In 12,000 years, the ancient voice said, the council has grown cautious. We have become curators of the status quo rather than guardians of life." Every head in the hall turned toward the source of the voice. From the shadows stepped a being that most of the aliens present had probably thought was just a legend. The eternal observer was so old that its exact age was unknown. Some said it had been alive when the galaxy was young. Others claimed it had watched the birth and death of entire civilizations. Its body seemed to be made of starlight and shadow, constantly shifting between solid matter and pure energy. The Nexari prosecutor's energy field flickered with what might have been confusion or fear. "Eternal observer," it said, its mathematical voice sounding uncertain for the first time. "Your words seem to support these humans and their reckless behavior." The observer moved down from the upper gallery, floating rather than walking until it reached the main floor of the hall. When it laughed, the sound was like distant thunder mixed with the music of solar winds. "Reckless?" the observer said, turning its attention to the prosecutor. "Child, I have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore. I have seen species bloom with potential and then wither away into nothing. I have observed the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. Do you know what I have not seen in these past 1,000 years of council rule?" The hall was completely silent. Now, even the translation machines seemed to hum more quietly, as if they too were waiting to hear what this ancient being had to say. "Growth," the observer continued. "Innovation, hope, wonder, the spark of possibility that drives intelligent life to reach for something greater than what they already have." The ancient being turned toward Jake, Lisa, and Aaron. Until now, Aaron felt a chill of understanding run through him. "You have been waiting for us, haven't you?" he asked. "Not specifically for humans, but for someone like us. Someone who would challenge the way things have always been done." The observer nodded slowly, its form shifting like smoke in a gentle breeze. "The galaxy has grown stagnant under the Council's careful stewardship. For 12,000 years we have maintained peace by preventing change. We have preserved order by forbidding innovation. We have avoided conflict by refusing to take sides. even when one side was clearly right and the other was clearly wrong. Around the hall, representatives from different species began to murmur among themselves. The observer's words were having an impact that Jake could feel, even though he could not understand most of the alien languages being spoken. The Valdorian council member raised one webbed hand to get attention. "Eternal observer," she said, her aquatic voice bubbling with confusion. "Are you suggesting that humanity's violations of galactic law were actually necessary? Are you saying that breaking the rules was the right thing to do?" The observer turned to face her, and when it spoke, its voice carried the authority of eons. "I am suggesting that a law which prevents the saving of innocent lives is not a law worth keeping. I am suggesting that a rule which requires good people to stand by and watch others suffer is not a rule that serves the greater good. I am suggesting that maybe, just maybe, these young humans have remembered something that we older civilizations have forgotten." "What is that?" asked the Korthak speaker, her scales now showing patterns of genuine curiosity rather than hostility. "That the purpose of civilization is not to create perfect order," the observer replied. "The purpose of civilization is to make life better for all intelligent beings. Rules and laws are supposed to serve that purpose, not replace it." Lisa stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to press their advantage. "The observer speaks wisdom that we have tried to follow in our short time as galactic citizens," she said. "Every action that this council calls a violation, we call an improvement. Every rule that we have broken was broken in service to a higher law. The law that says intelligent beings have a responsibility to help each other when they can." The observer moved closer to the three humans, and Jake could feel the immense age and wisdom radiating from the ancient being. "These humans have done something that no species has done in my memory," it said. "They have put compassion ahead of protocol. They have chosen to act rather than to deliberate. They have risked their own safety and reputation to help others, even when those others were complete strangers." The hall buzzed with conversation as aliens began to reconsider what they had heard. Jake could see that the mood of the assembly was changing. The humans were no longer seen as reckless troublemakers. Instead, they were beginning to be seen as something the galaxy had not had in a very long time, a force for positive change. The observer raised what might have been a hand for silence. "I have a question for this assembly," it announced. "In the 12,000 years of council rule, how many species have we allowed to go extinct because intervening would have violated the sacred doctrine of non-interference? How many worlds have we watched burn because getting involved would have been improper? How many innocent beings have died because we chose to follow procedure instead of following our conscience?" The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truth. The great hall fell completely silent as Jake Morrison raised his hand to request permission to speak. The silence was so deep that he could hear his own heartbeat and the quiet hum of the translation machines. Thousands of alien eyes focused on him as he waited for the High Counselor to give him permission to address the assembly. "Permission granted," the Zephyrian High Counselor said, her crystal voice echoing through the vast space. "The accused may speak in their defense." Jake walked slowly to the exact center of the crystalline floor. His military boots made soft clicking sounds that echoed through the hall. He stopped in the middle of the room and turned slowly, looking up at all the different species that surrounded him. Some looked curious, others seemed bored, and many appeared hostile. But Jake had faced worse odds before, and he was not going to let fear stop him from saying what needed to be said. "You speak of our violations as if they were crimes," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation system. "But I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully about your answer. When the Talari children were dying of the Void Plague, when their parents were crying and begging anyone who would listen to save their young ones, was our choice to help them really wrong?" A murmur ran through the assembly. Jake could see that his question had made some of the aliens uncomfortable. They had not expected him to challenge their accusations so directly. "The law was clear," called out a member of the Andromedean delegation, a tall being with silver skin and large black eyes. "The plague zone was under quarantine. No one was supposed to enter or leave those worlds." Jake nodded. Yes, the law was clear. But let me tell you what we saw when we got there. We found entire cities full of sick and dying people. We saw parents holding their children as they wasted away from a disease that attacked their nervous systems. We watched as whole families died because they had no medicine, no treatment, and no hope. He paused and looked around the hall. The council knew about this plague for months. You had the technology to create a cure. Your medical databases contained all the information needed to synthesize an effective treatment. But you chose to do nothing because the law said you should not interfere. The Valdorian council member spoke up again, her aquatic voice bubbling through her environmental suit. The quarantine law exists to prevent the spread of dangerous diseases. If we had allowed free travel to and from the plague worlds, the infection could have spread across the entire galaxy. Aaron Blake stepped forward to support his commander. That would have been a valid concern if we had acted recklessly, he said. But we did not. Our medical teams developed a complete cure for the Void Plague before we ever set foot on a Talari world. We implemented strict containment protocols to ensure that no infected material could escape. We eliminated the disease entirely, not just from the Talari people, but from their entire star system. The point is not whether your intervention was successful. The prosecutor interjected, its energy field flashing with cold light. The point is that you violated established law. You acted without authorization and disrupted the natural course of events. Jake felt his anger rising, but he controlled it and channeled it into his words. Natural course of events, he repeated. You mean we disrupted the natural course of watching innocent children die from a curable disease, while beings with the power to help them chose to do nothing? The hall erupted in a mixture of sounds as different species reacted to his words. Some aliens made noises that sounded like approval. Others hissed or clicked in what seemed like anger, and many just sat in uncomfortable silence. Lisa Brooks moved to stand beside Jake, her diplomatic training helping her find the right words to support his emotional appeal. The Epsilon colony situation was similar, she said, her voice calm and professional. When the Ravager fleet attacked that peaceful farming colony, the colonists sent distress signals across half the galaxy. They begged for help from anyone who could hear them. The council received those signals but decided that the colonists' fate was not their responsibility. She produced a small data crystal from her jacket and held it up so everyone could see it. This crystal contains the actual distress messages from Epsilon Colony. Would the council like me to play them so everyone can hear what we heard? Several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jake could guess why. The distress signals from Epsilon had been heartbreaking to listen to. Families saying goodbye to each other as enemy ships approached, children asking why no one was coming to help them. Colonists who had worked for years to build new lives watching everything they had created burn. That will not be necessary, the High Counselor said quickly. We are aware of the Epsilon incident. Aaron took another step forward. With respect, Counselor, I do not think you fully understand what happened at Epsilon. The colonists were not soldiers or politicians. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, and shopkeepers. They had never hurt anyone, and they posed no threat to anyone. The only reason they were attacked was because the Ravagers wanted their crops and livestock. He paused and looked around the hall. We arrived just in time to see families being separated as the Ravagers decided which colonists to keep as slaves, and which ones to kill as examples to the others. We saw children being torn away from their parents. We watched as years of hard work and dreams were destroyed for no reason other than greed. Your emotional response is understandable, said the Korthak speaker, her scales now showing patterns of what might have been sympathy, but emotion cannot be allowed to override law. If every species acted on their feelings instead of following proper procedures, there would be chaos throughout the galaxy. Jake looked directly at the Korthak representative. You call it chaos, but we call it caring. Yes, we acted on our emotions. We felt anger when we saw innocent people being hurt. We felt sadness when we watched children suffer. We felt hope when we realized we had the power to make things better. And yes, we felt joy when we were able to save lives. He turned to address the entire assembly. You want to know what makes humanity different from the rest of you? We refuse To accept that suffering is inevitable just because it is legal. We refuse to believe that following rules is more important than saving lives. And yes, we refuse to stand by and watch innocents die just because some ancient law says we should mind our own business. The hall fell silent again, but this time, the silence felt different. Jake could sense that his words were having an impact on some of the aliens present. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Lisa seized the moment and produced another data crystal. May I present evidence of humanity's actual impact on galactic civilization during our 50 years of citizenship, she asked. The crystal projected holographic displays that filled the air above the center of the hall. The displays showed star maps with glowing lines representing trade routes. These are the new commerce lanes that exist because of human colonies and partnerships, Lisa explained. Trade between species has increased by 40% since humans joined the galactic community. The hologram shifted to show cultural exchanges and educational programs. Humans have established schools and universities on 23 worlds, sharing knowledge and learning from alien cultures. We have created art galleries, music festivals, and sports competitions that bring different species together in friendship rather than conflict. Finally, the display showed technological developments and scientific advances. The cure for void plague that we developed is now being used to save lives in 47 different star systems. The agricultural techniques we have shared with struggling colonies have eliminated famine on 18 worlds. Our defensive technologies, which we have freely shared with anyone who asks, have deterred 3 separate Ravager fleet invasions. Jake stepped back into the center of the room as the holographic displays faded. You call us young and impulsive and emotional. Maybe we are. But in 50 years, we have done more to improve life in this galaxy than your council has accomplished. In thousands of years of careful deliberation and strict rule following, a strange shimmer appeared in the center of the Great Hall, and slowly a being made of pure energy took shape. The Nexari prosecutor was not solid like most of the other aliens in the room. Instead, it was a collection of bright lights and moving patterns that hurt to look at directly. Its body was contained inside a geometric frame that looked like a cage made of silver math equations. When the prosecutor spoke, its voice did not sound like any living thing. It was cold and precise, like a computer reading numbers. The evidence against the species known as humans is extensive and clear, it said. The words echoed through the hall without any warmth or emotion. In the 50 Earth years since this species achieved faster than light travel, they have committed numerous violations of galactic law. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard these accusations before, but hearing them spoken in this great hall, surrounded by thousands of alien witnesses, made them seem more serious and frightening. The prosecutor's energy field pulsed brighter as it continued. First, the humans have established colonies on 47 worlds without proper authorization from the Galactic Council. They claim these worlds were empty or that they had permission from local populations, but they did not wait for official approval from the proper authorities. Lisa stepped forward, her years of diplomatic training evident in the way she moved with calm confidence. "Honored prosecutor," she said, her voice clear and respectful. "We dispute that characterization. Every single one of our colonies was established either on completely uninhabited worlds or with the clear and explicit consent of the beings who already lived there. We have documentation to prove this." A sound that might have been laughter came from the section where the Korthak delegation sat. The Korthaks were reptilian beings with scales that changed color based on their emotions. Right now, their scales were showing patterns of amusement and contempt. Their speaker, a large female with bright green markings, hissed when she talked. "Documentation," the Korthak speaker said, her forked tongue flicking out as she spoke. How typically human to think that papers and signatures matter more than proper procedure. You act first and justify later. Aaron Blake watched the reactions of the different species around the hall. His scientific mind automatically cataloged what he saw. Some aliens looked afraid of what humans might do next. Others seemed amused by what they saw as human foolishness. But there was something else. Something harder to identify. In the faces of a few species, he thought he could see something that looked almost like hope. The prosecutor ignored the interruption and continued. with its methodical presentation. Second, the humans have formed military alliances with 16 different species. These alliances were created without council oversight and serve to destabilize the careful balance of power that has kept peace in this galaxy for 12,000 years. Those alliances are defensive in nature, Lisa replied quickly. We have never used our military partnerships to attack or threaten any peaceful species. Every single one of our allies came to us asking for help against raiders, pirates, or aggressive neighbors. The prosecutor's lights flashed in what might have been annoyance. The humans' intentions are irrelevant. What matters is that they have created new power structures without permission from the Council. This is a direct violation of the Galactic Stability Doctrine. Jake felt his temper starting to rise, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would not help their case. Instead, he thought about all the species that humans had helped over the years. The small farming communities that had been attacked by space pirates until human patrol ships started protecting their trade routes. The mining colonies that had been threatened by aggressive neighbors until human diplomats helped negotiate peace treaties. Third, the prosecutor continued, and most seriously, the humans have violated the sacred doctrine of non-interference 12 times in their short history as galactic citizens. They have inserted themselves into conflicts and crises that were not their responsibility, causing unpredictable changes to situations that should have been allowed to develop naturally. This was the accusation that Jake had been dreading. The sacred doctrine of non-interference was one of the oldest and most respected laws in galactic civilization. It said that species should not get involved in the internal affairs of other worlds or civilizations. The idea was that every species should be allowed to develop and solve their own problems without outside interference. The prosecutor's energy field grew brighter as it began to list specific incidents. The humans rescued the Talari people from the Void Plague, despite explicit orders from the Council to maintain quarantine around the infected worlds. They defended the Epsilon colony against the Ravager fleet, even though they had no legal obligation or authority to do so. They provided military support to the Outer Rim settlements during the Pirate Wars, again without authorization. And within each example, Jake remembered the faces of the people they had saved. The Talari children who had been dying from a horrible disease that ate away at their bodies from the inside. The terrified colonists on Epsilon who had sent desperate messages, begging for help as enemy ships approached their world. The farmers and miners of the Outer Rim, who had worked hard to build new lives on frontier worlds, only to have pirates steal everything they had built. The humans consistently choose emotional responses over logical adherence to established law, the prosecutor said. They act on impulse and sentiment rather than careful consideration of consequences. This makes them dangerous and unpredictable. A new voice spoke from across the hall. The Valdorian council member was an aquatic being whose blue-green body was visible through the transparent walls of her environmental suit. Water flowed around her gills as she breathed, and her large eyes reflected the light like mirrors. The prosecutor speaks truth, the Valdorian said. Law exists to prevent chaos and maintain order. When species ignore established procedures and act on emotion instead of logic, the result is always instability and conflict. The human's pattern of behavior shows they cannot be trusted to follow proper protocols. Jake looked around the hall and saw many aliens nodding in agreement. To them, humans seemed reckless and dangerous, a young species that did not understand how the galaxy really worked. They saw human compassion as a weakness and human willingness to help others as a threat to the established order. Aaron stepped forward, his scientific background making him comfortable with presenting evidence and logical arguments. With respect, Counselor, he said to the Valdorian, we choose compassion over convenience, not emotion over logic. Our actions are not random or impulsive. They are based on a careful evaluation of the situation and a determination that helping others is the right thing to do. The prosecutor's lights pulsed with what might have been satisfaction. The humans admit their guilt. They confess that they deliberately chose to violate galactic law in order to satisfy their own moral preferences. This is exactly the kind of arrogant behavior that makes them unfit for galactic citizenship. The Zephyrian High Counselor's crystal body rang like a bell as she prepared to speak. The evidence is clear and the humans have confessed to their violations. The penalty for such extensive law-breaking is expulsion from galactic society and permanent quarantine to your home system. Your species will be forbidden from traveling beyond the boundaries of your own solar system, and any attempt to do so will be met with force. Jake felt his heart sink as he heard the sentence. Being cut off from the rest of the galaxy would doom humanity to isolation and stagnation. Earth would become a prison, and all the friends they had made among the stars would be lost forever. Jake Morrison stood in the middle of the biggest room he had ever seen. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that sparkled and glowed with soft light. Around him, sitting in rows that went up and up like a giant stadium, were creatures from all across the galaxy. Some looked like giant insects, others were floating balls of light, and some were so strange that Jake could not even figure out what they were supposed to be. The air in the room made a quiet humming sound. Jake knew this was the sound of the machines that changed what everyone said into words that all the different aliens could understand. Without these machines, the meeting would be impossible because every species spoke in completely different ways. Jake wore his best military uniform. The blue fabric was clean and pressed, and all his medals were polished bright. He had earned every one of those medals during his 20 years of service to Earth's space fleet. Now he stood here as more than just a soldier. He was Earth's voice in this place where the most powerful beings in the galaxy made decisions that affected billions of lives. To his left stood Lisa Brooks. She was Earth's top diplomat, someone who had spent years learning about alien cultures and laws. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a formal black suit that made her look serious and professional. Lisa had studied harder than anyone Jake knew to understand how the galaxy's government worked. She knew more about space law than most of the aliens sitting around them. On Jake's right was Aaron Blake, a man who had spent his whole life studying alien life forms. Aaron was tall and thin with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire glasses. He was the one who had created the rules that humans used when they met new alien species for the first time. These rules had stopped 3 wars before they could start, just in the past year alone. The 3 humans had traveled for weeks to get to this place. The council hall was built on a space station that floated between galaxies, far from any star or planet. It was neutral ground where no single species had power over the others. At least that was how it was supposed to work. Jake looked around at all the alien faces staring down at him. Some seemed curious about these new humans who had come to their great hall. Others looked angry or disgusted. Many just seemed bored, like they had seen this same scene many times before with other species who had been brought here to be judged. Near the front of the room sat the most important members of the council. The Zephyrian High Counselor was a beautiful creature that looked like she was made of living crystal. Her body caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind blowing through a cave filled with musical instruments. Species designation human, the High Counselor said, and her words echoed through the great hall. You have been called here to answer for your kind's unusual way of acting as citizens of this galaxy. Jake felt his heart beat faster. He had known this day would come ever since humans had first traveled beyond their own solar system 50 years ago. Earth's people had a way of doing things that made the older alien civilizations nervous. Humans did not always follow the rules that had been made thousands of years before Earth's people had even learned to make fire. The charges against humanity were not secret. Every human who worked in space knew what the aliens complained about. They said humans were too quick to fight when they should talk. They said humans took over too many worlds too fast. But worst of all, they said humans cared too much about other species and got involved in problems that were not their business. We are ready to answer any questions you have, Jake said. His voice was steady and strong, even though inside he felt nervous. Around the hall, beings who had lived for thousands of years and who had watched entire civilizations rise and fall turned their attention to him. Some leaned forward in their seats, surprised by how confident he sounded. Jake thought about all the things that had brought them to this moment. In just 50 years since humans had invented faster than light travel, they had spread across 47 different worlds. They had made friends and allies with 16 different alien species. They had built cities, farms, and factories on planets that had never seen intelligent life before. But they had also broken what the aliens called the sacred doctrine of non-interference 12 times. Each time, humans had gotten involved in situations where the council said they should have stayed away. Each time, humans had chosen to help other beings instead of following the ancient rules. Lisa stepped closer to Jake's side. She had spent months preparing for this day, studying every law and precedent she could find. She knew that the penalty for what humans had done could be severe. The council could ban all humans from traveling beyond their own solar system. They could cut Earth off from all trade and communication with the rest of the galaxy. They could make it so that humans would be alone in the universe, isolated on their single world while the rest of the galaxy moved on without them. Aaron looked around at the different species in the hall, his scientific mind automatically cataloging what he saw. He noticed that not all of the aliens looked hostile. Some seemed genuinely interested in what the humans had to say. A few even looked like they might be sympathetic to Earth's cause. The humming of the translation machines grew, louder as more and more aliens began to whisper among themselves. Jake could not understand what they were saying, but he could guess. They were probably talking about all the things humans had done wrong, all the rules they had broken, all the trouble they had caused in their short time as members of galactic civilization. But Jake also thought about all the good things humans had done. He thought about the lives they had saved, the worlds they had protected, and the friends they had made among the stars. He wondered if any of that would matter to these ancient beings who valued order and tradition above all else. The High Counselor raised one crystal hand, and the hall fell silent. "The formal charges will now be read," she announced. "Let all present bear witness to the crimes of humanity." The voting process in the Galactic Council was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Representatives from each species stood in turn to announce their decision, but before they voted, many chose to speak about their choice. What surprised Jake the most was how many of them had stories to tell about humans, stories that he had never heard before. The Talari delegate was the first to speak. She was a small, delicate being with pale blue skin and large silver eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness and joy in the universe. When she stood to address the assembly, her voice was soft but clear. "My people were dying," she said simply. "The void plague had taken hold in our star system, and we watched helplessly as it spread from world to world. Our children were the first to get sick, and they suffered terribly before they died. We sent messages asking for help, but the council told us that quarantine was necessary and that we must accept our fate." She paused, and Jake could see tears running down her blue cheeks. Then the humans came. They did not ask for permission, and they did not wait for official approval. They simply came because they knew we were in pain. They worked day and night to create a cure for the plague, and they risked their own lives to bring it to our worlds. The Talari delegate looked directly at Jake, Lisa, and Aaron. "Because of these humans, my daughter is alive today. Because of their willingness to break your laws, an entire generation of Talari children grew up instead of dying. How can this assembly call such actions criminal?" She sat down, and immediately another delegate stood up. This one was from Epsilon Colony, a human-looking alien with green skin and 4 arms. "The Ravagers came to our world like a storm of death and destruction," he said. "We had no military, no weapons, no way to defend ourselves. We were farmers and teachers and shopkeepers, people who had never hurt anyone in our lives." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "We sent distress calls to every corner of the galaxy. We begged for help from anyone who would listen. The council received our messages but decided that our fate was not their concern. We were told that interfering would violate the doctrine of non-interference." Jake remembered that terrible day when they had arrived at Epsilon Colony. The Ravager ships had been in the middle of separating families, deciding which colonists to keep as slaves and which to kill. The memory still made him angry. "The humans came," the Epsilon delegate continued. "Not because they had to, not because any law required it, but because they could not stand to watch innocent people suffer. They fought the Ravagers and drove them away. They helped us rebuild our homes and our lives. Today, Epsilon Colony is thriving because humans chose compassion over compliance." As delegate after delegate stood to speak, A pattern emerged. Species after species had stories about human interventions that had made their lives better. Some told of human medical teams that had saved lives during natural disasters. Others spoke of human engineers who had helped rebuild cities destroyed by war. Still others described human diplomats who had negotiated peace treaties between warring factions. But it was the youngest member of the assembly who cast what everyone knew would be the deciding vote. The Kythera representative was barely old enough to hold a council position. She was an insect-like being with delicate wings and compound eyes that reflected the light like jewels. When she stood on her thin legs to address the hall, her voice was barely above a whisper, but the translation system carried her words to every corner of the great chamber. "I have spent my entire adult life studying the historical records of this council," she said, her wings trembling slightly with nervousness. "In 12,000 years of galactic government, we have prevented countless wars through careful diplomacy. We have maintained peace across billions of worlds through strict adherence to law and procedure. We have created the most stable and orderly civilization that the galaxy has ever known." She paused, and Jake felt his heart sink. This sounded like the beginning of a speech that would condemn humanity to isolation and exile. But then the young Kythera continued, and her words surprised everyone in the hall. "We have also watched 97 intelligent species go completely extinct without lifting a finger to help them, because intervention would have been improper according to our laws. We have observed 43 planetary genocides without taking action, because getting involved would have violated our principles of non-interference. We have seen millions of beings die from preventable diseases, famines, and natural disasters, while we debated whether helping them would set a bad precedent." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, and her wings stopped trembling. "The humans have been citizens of this galaxy for only 50 years, and in that time, not a single intelligent species has gone extinct. Not because they were lucky, but because, when extinction threatened, humans intervened. They broke our laws to save lives, and the galaxy is immeasurably better because they did." She turned to look directly at Jake, Lisa, and Aaron. "The humans have reminded us of something we had forgotten in our 12,000 years of careful rulemaking. They have shown us that laws are meant to serve life, not the other way around. They have demonstrated that sometimes the most moral thing you can do is to break an immoral rule." The final vote was recorded as 547 in favor of humanity's continued citizenship, 446 opposed, with 127 abstentions. But Jake knew that the numbers barely captured the significance of what had just happened in the Great Hall. The Zephyrian High Counselor stood to deliver the verdict, her crystal body ringing like a bell as she moved. "By majority vote of this assembly," she announced, "humanity is granted full citizenship rights within the Galactic Council, with all the privileges and responsibilities that such citizenship entails." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the High Counselor was not finished speaking. "However," she continued, "this decision comes with a special condition and a new responsibility." Jake tensed, waiting for restrictions that would limit human freedom or prevent them from helping others in the future. "The condition," the High Counselor said, "is that humanity agrees to serve as the Council's Department of Humanitarian Affairs. When civilizations face extinction, when species cry out for help, when the letter of the law conflicts with the preservation of life, we will call upon you to do what we have apparently forgotten how to do ourselves." Lisa stepped forward, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You want us to be the ones who break the rules when breaking the rules is the right thing to do?" The Eternal Observer answered her question. "We want you to be our conscience," the ancient being said. "We want you to remind us that the purpose of government is to protect and preserve life, not to maintain perfect order. We want you to show us that sometimes the most courageous thing a civilization can do is to care more about doing right than about following rules." Aaron looked around the hall at all the alien faces staring down at them. "So when someone needs help, and the law says we should not give it, you want us to help them anyway?" "Yes," said the High Counselor. "And when you do, we will support you instead of condemning you. We will change our laws to match your actions instead of punishing you for breaking outdated rules." Jake felt a smile spread across his face as he realized what this meant. Humanity would not just be citizens of the galaxy, They would be the galaxy's helpers, the ones who stepped in when everyone else was too worried about protocol to act. They would be the voice of compassion in a government that had forgotten how to care. As the three humans stood in the crystal hall surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, they realized that they had not just won their freedom. They had won the right to be themselves, to carry their humanity to the stars, and to ensure that in a vast universe of ancient wisdom and careful law, there would always be someone willing to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and action over endless deliberation. In the years that followed, when species across the galaxy faced their darkest hours, they would send messages across the void with a simple request: send the humans. And humanity would answer, not because they had to, but because they could not imagine doing anything else. The echo of Jake Morrison's words would resonate through the halls of galactic power for generations to come. We refuse to accept that. Suffering is inevitable just because it is legal. And in that refusal, the galaxy found its heart again.